Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
Yes.
You guys, we're now, I don't even know what number this is anymore, but breaking news being reported, you're hearing it here third, because you've already seen it on Twitter and also at least one news source. But Giuliani finally caught COVID.
Right.
He's been searching it out for just months,
Right.
looking under every rock.
Yep.
Going into every unmasked gathering.
Yep.
Holding several of his own unmasked gatherings.
Sure.
Wiping his sweat on the women and people nearest to him.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, he has been taken by the COVID.
Yeah. I mean, this was the logical end. We've all been talking a lot about logical ends lately since the campaign is over, and there was there was his event, next door to the porn shop, and the
logical end, Four Seasons
factory or whatever, Four Seasons Landscaping, right? There's been a lot of logical ends, and this is yet another. It's interesting because it's been a lot of endings.
And yet it never seems to fully complete.
Right, exactly. Which is really kind of the story of the Trump administration, really, right?
Right. It was sort of over before it started.
Right, over before it started, and also just sort of just when you think that he's done the one thing that should be no longer acceptable for a president to do. There's just one additional. There's always one more thing, right?
I think let's let this be a life lesson to us. I think there are times that it feels like your life is so falling apart, ever fix it, and nothing can ever be the same, or you're just so embarrassed that your reputation will never, overcome whatever, like stuff like that. There is no actual logical end to anything, you guys.
No, there's not.
It turns out that if you embarrass yourself to the highest possible degree, Donald Trump has never, he's the most embarrassing human being on the planet, aside from Rudy Giuliani. Both of these idiots have just continued to exist despite their horrible 4 years. And every day they wake up again, and it doesn't matter that yesterday was the silliest day that has ever happened in human history, because they wake up and today is a new opportunity.
Yeah, it's
Live your life like you can never be taken down by being a complete idiot and ruining the lives of everyone.
The constant additional insanity of the last 4 years. It's reminds me of that 30 Rock episode with Carrie Fisher where Liz Lemon finally says at one point, she was like, never go with a hippie to a second location.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I feel like we've just been constantly at a second location with a hippie.
Yeah, for years.
For years, yeah.
And what was even
and none
more
of them
fitting,
are actual hippies. It'd be more fun if they were.
Right? I feel like what was especially fitting about this particular announcement was that it was made by Donald Trump for unknown reasons.
So good.
And this is how he announced it.
Yeah.
On Twitter, obviously. Rudy Giuliani, by far the greatest mayor in the history of New York City, and who has been working tirelessly exposing the most corrupt election by far, has tested positive for the China virus. Get better soon, Rudy. We will carry on. And that's so true. We will carry on whether or not Rudy carries on. That's one thing that we know. But it sounds like Rudy, they found this out, or it sounds like he's in the hospital. Someone saw him in Georgetown. Not Georgetown, the neighborhood, like Georgetown, the hospital.
Well, there's got to be other hapless mayors that they can add to the strike force.
Right? There's nobody quite like Rudy, though. I think there's not another ex-New York City mayor that adds the specific pizzazz that Rudy Giuliani brought to the strike force. Yeah. I think Chris Christie was the closest that they had on the team initially. Right. But Giuliani's obviously much more Chris Christie-ish than Chris Christie himself. So, but that's a very narrow lane, that kind of weird tri-state area character, blowhard character. And even Bloomberg, who is a blowhard and is a mayor from the tri-state area, doesn't really fit the bill. Because Bloomberg, and I hate saying this, but Bloomberg is too successful to fit the bill.
That's true.
In any case, look forward to more of these announcements, because the State Department's hosting a super spreader event for the holidays. And
they sent out
the entire diplomatic corps is going to be taken down soon. God. So if you are if you know a diplomat from, I don't know, Turkey, or anyway, I'm just name a country, they too may soon be taken down by coronavirus, thanks to the White House doing its damnedest to make sure that they super spread this thing as far and wide as possible, because otherwise, how are we going to get to herd immunity? The White House is doing everything they can to create a herd immunity situation inside the White House.
Yeah.
So, look forward to more stories of this nature.
Yeah.
But nobody actually knows whether Giuliani had he just has a lot of risk factors,
Right.
He's also a person who, due to karma, deserves a lot of risk factors. But,
yeah, sure.
Who can know?
Oh, man.
In any case, we've started to hear some initial plans about, not the Democratic National Convention, about the inauguration.
Which is,
coming to you from the organizers of the DNC.
Yeah, exactly. Remember those 8 hours of primetime television that you can't get back in your life?
The 8 hour, let's be honest, you only watched 4 because after the first 4, you were like,
yeah.
Do you remember all of those dazed and confused elder statesmen staring at the wrong camera with a weird delay in front of a landmark you couldn't identify in a city you've never heard of?
Yeah.
Well, get ready. That's coming back to your living rooms.
We got more where that came from.
That's right. The Biden team is working furious plans. They don't think that lots of people will be encouraged to amass in the National Mall like usual, although I would contend that they probably won't be able to stop lots of people from doing that. Excitement to not have Donald Trump be the president, that I suspect there will be a bit of an...
Yeah, I think you're right.
Promoted by them.
Yeah.
But I think, it has almost nothing to do with Joe Biden ever. Like, people were not celebrating in the streets because of their love of Joe Biden when the election was finally called. They were celebrating how excited they were to be together at a time that Donald Trump was no longer going to be the president.
Yes.
And that's what this will be as well. But as far as the official ceremony goes, that is likely to be awkward if the same team is involved in the inauguration plans, because the one thing that the DNC managed to show is that despite getting the votes of every young person in America, the Democratic Party doesn't have anyone with any tech savvy involved in any level of their operation. And because of that, they have no way of putting on an event that's even halfway interesting or worthwhile for this kind of remote celebrating.
How come they just don't do it as another one of those freaking drive-ups with just like a bunch of trucks and people sitting in the back of trucks?
I mean, right? Like, also, it feels like they could have taken a message from the non-super spreader part of the RNC and been like, oh, you can have people give polished speeches that are targeted to voters at an event without... The RNC was not a super spreader event.
Right.
They had really polished packages. They had polished speakers who had crazy eyes, but they had rehearsed.
They clearly had a teleprompter, so it looked like people were staring at the camera, which was
which is so important when people are speaking.
Yeah.
They were not shot at weird and awkward angles. There were not sound issues. I mean, there were some things that they could have taken away from the event that the RNC put together that might be worthwhile learning experiences if they want the inauguration to be even halfway watchable or not just like an embarrassment to history. But it sounds like they're not going to consult any of those people, so don't worry about it. No. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You won't be watching it because Trump is planning to announce his candidacy that same day to pull headlines, and that will be what the media covers, because that's...
If they're not going to if they're not going to ask any of those people who are tech savvy how to run an election, they're certainly not going to ask them how to do their...
That's so true. And speaking of that,
do the inauguration.
That might suit change. So they, Dem leadership roles weeks, and they elected a new D-Trip chair this week. The new chair of the D-Trip. Last year it was Sherry Bustos, massive fail. This year, Sean Patrick Maloney, yet another incredibly conservative Democrat from a swing district that Trump won. Telling us how to run our campaigns and pick candidates.
Yes.
Now, there's one non-disastrous thing he's talking about, but I would contend that he doesn't deserve it. I don't like celebrating people for making what are obvious good decisions.
Yes.
In the same way that I didn't want to have to call Dianne Feinstein and tell her Jeff Sessions was a racist, I don't want to have to celebrate that John Patrick Maloney is talking about ending the DNC or the D-Trip blacklist.
Right.
Because that is what any thinking human being should do, because you know who's winning elections is people using the firms on the DNC blacklist.
I know. Right.
That's who wins elections.
Yeah, the blacklist had a pretty good hit rate.
Not only did it have a pretty good hit rate, but it also helped. It like basically created a progressive infrastructure, which is exactly what they were trying to avoid doing. Because progressives were like, oh, I guess we need our own companies. And also it turns out we're the only people who know how to run elections. And now we're not going to share that knowledge with the incumbents that we're taking on. And so instead, hire the firms that are winning all the elections, and the progressives are the only people with access to this knowledge.
Right.
And that was shown to be a problem, because a lot of progressives that everyone said would not win easily, would not win their seats at all, were found easily winning their seats. And a lot of moderates who were running in districts that were, you know, equally sort of contentious districts, found that they could not find voters to vote for them in those districts, even though 2 years before.
Yeah. Now, Sean Patrick Maloney is awful. We'll tell you about that in just a second. But you know, there wasn't a progressive who ran for the position, and maybe it's just because they probably had no chance, which I would contend is probably accurate in this environment. There's just not enough of them, and the moderates are just so awful and think that they know everything that like clearly they would not have backed any of them. But a lot of the progressives ended up getting behind Tony Cardenas. From California,
who was running against
Sean Patrick Maloney. And I just don't understand why they didn't go with Tony Cardenas. They, especially after they got hammered in the Latino community. I just don't, that doesn't make any sense to me. Sean Patrick Maloney, like you said, is from the Trump district. And I know that like that has been a priority, flipping some of these districts back, like flipping some of these counties that were like Obama, Trump. But, you know, we have talked extensively on this podcast as to why running a conservative is not necessarily the answer. Like people who voted for people who voted for Barack Obama are not looking for someone who is going to like be a super moderate. Like that's not why they switched there. So like he has taken all of the wrong information from everything. But basically his solution, after they sort of like looked at, you know, some of the issues that they had after 2016, was just that everybody should just be running as like boring, you know, medium Republicans.
Well, as Republicans, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's he led an investigation into the party's problems in the House in 2016. The report never came out, but he told the Washington Post a little bit about it. And basically, he used it to make an argument for running intensely conservative Democrats for like every seat, basically.
Yeah.
A couple of Democrats that worked for, but a lot of them that it didn't work for. He's somebody who's taken the wrong message out of his own wins, which is part of the problem, because he's incredibly conservative. He endorsed a Republican last year in his district and basically endorsed him because I think it was because he had changed his position on same-sex marriage or something. Like it was something ridiculous. It was like one of those like will endorse RC endorse against Tammy Duckworth because he was the best Republican.
Oh yeah, Mark Kirk. Yeah.
So I mean, I feel like it was like one of those kinds of. But basically, he's a part. You know, he's a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus. He's a New Democrat. The Problem Solvers Caucus, by the way, is the most infuriating. Like, if you ask anyone who's not in the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House about it, they just roll their eyes and tell you that those people are the most annoying people on the entire planet.
Well, they would have to be. And also, what are they actually getting done? I mean,
nothing. Well, that's the thing, is it's like they wander around acting like sanctimonious about their bipartisanship, and they have not been able to solve any problems.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, I would always have a problem with their politics, right? Like, because I just wouldn't ever agree with any of their. I would never agree with any of that. But like, I would potentially tolerate them and also tolerate the name if they were pushing through like massive amounts of legislation. They're not doing it all. They're not doing that at all.
Everyone else, but they're doing, which is classic.
Yeah.
But I think Sean Patrick Maloney has in the past, A, indicated that he thinks we should run really conservative people in conservative districts. B, thinks that we shouldn't even be bothering with districts that we don't have a clear path to victory in, which is so misguided and so insane. I can't treated like no understanding of what it takes to win a district. He's not any of the sort of politics side than Sherry Bustos did, who was basically and hoping that if you had no platform, no one could be mad at you. And I think, the seats that we failed to flip, there is a clear message to take out of it, but he has said to roll call in November, I don't give a damn about the past. I'm not a historian. My job is not to whine. My job is to win. He basically has indicated that he has no interest in
learning,
figuring out things went awry for them. And I think it's clear why things went awry for them. And it's that they were encouraged to run on no message in districts where, like it or not, the Republican. Now, was it insane? Sure.
Right.
To the polls to vote for a Democrat you haven't heard of, who hasn't said anything that piqued your interest even slightly, just because their opponent has insane messaging.
Right.
That only works with so many voters. But this reign of insisting on, first of all, incumbency protections above all else, even in districts that have clearly changed demographically. Yep. That's, they get really mad about the AOCs of the world, but AOC ran in a district where the demographics had changed dramatically. Elliot Engel's district changed dramatically. It was time for someone new to be representing those districts.
Right.
So, insane policy anyway, but also he is somebody who is going to continue this reign of terror of boring centrists up for seats that they have no hope of winning. And then when they put them in Senate races. So this actually creates a whole layer of new problems after they lose in the House. And he shows no signs of being interested. I will say, however, it's a good thing that they're getting rid of the blacklist. It was so foolish to have it in the first place that
Well, right. I mean, and I think the fact, because Cardenas had also said that he was going to do that. My guess is that I agree with you. I am glad that they are doing this, but I'm not going to give Sean Patrick Maloney any credit because my guess is that, because also Pelosi was obviously very much behind that. My guess is that it was decided that they were probably going to, this isn't some just great decision that only the two people who were running for D-Trip chair came to. The leadership in the House decided this, and we should be glad that they decided that. But we shouldn't go around talking about how great and wonderful Sean Patrick Maloney is because he decided it, because he didn't.
Well, he's not that great or wonderful.
No, exactly.
So we don't have to go around talking about it. And then has some action in it now, because Clyburn has an opinion.
Listen. He's got an opinion about a lot of things, and we're going to talk about a few of them.
He seems to be having here. So many.
His opinion, that he had back in March led us to, or February, I guess it was, led us to Joe Biden being the presidential nominee. So I feel like his opinions can be done with now at this point. He voiced his important opinion. It worked out for him, and I guess to a degree, America. And now
50-50.
I don't know that we need him to be telling us who should run.
Listen, it worked out for him in the sense that his beloved Big Pharma is now safe from any meaningful. Right. So the most important.
Yeah. But he is pushing Jamie Harrison to run the DNC. And I'm not surprised by this, because Jamie Harrison was one of the people who was sort of really actually in the mix the last time that this was up, and then ultimately threw his weight behind Tom Perez, because obviously he was going to do anything that he could to do the, to stop the Bernie crowd, because they were all pushing for Keith Ellison. So he basically used his own whatever power he had, and he does have some because he was the state party chair at that point. Right. So he's well respected by other state party chairs to sort of make sure that Keith Ellison didn't get that job. So that doesn't make me super happy. But also, I just don't, nobody, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this. Actually, what'd you say?
I have clear feelings about it.
You have clear feelings about it. And I agree with all of your clear feelings about it. I have a few things that I think maybe would make him at least maybe better, even specifically than Tom Perez, just because he literally has run a state party in a red state, which I think is not nothing. And Tom Perez is a dolt.
I think, though, Tom Perez, you have to remember, was a compromise candidate because Keith Ellison looked like he might be having too much heat behind him for the moderate wing of the party to bear.
Yeah.
Tom Perez was a sort of a progressive adjacent choice.
Right.
And he was terrible. And I'm not trying to suggest he wasn't terrible.
Right.
But I'm suggesting that choosing Jamie Harrison is fully throwing our lot in as a party with the most conservative wing of the Democratic Party. And we already have given them a lot. Yes. And we have not gotten one single bone thrown to us by them, and not only that, but we've endured just like months of insults from them.
Yeah.
And then to top all of that off, their did not pay off. We lost all these seats just because Joe Biden won against the craziest and most outrageous president in the history of the United States.
Yeah.
Does not mean that their strategy on literally every other level wasn't a massive failure. And what we're basically doing by choosing Jamie Harrison is further throwing our lot in with that strategy. And I would say two things about Jamie Harrison. Obviously, he's a better person than Lindsey Graham. And obviously, he was one of the few Senate candidates I sent money to, even though he had a lot of money, just because I was like, this would be a great race to win. Yes. But Lindsey Graham is a lunatic nonsense person, and Jamie Harrison is a losing Senate candidate.
Yes.
And that is
who set the record for most money that any Senate candidate had ever had.
It's like picking Amy McGrath to be the chair of the DNC. He does not know how to win campaigns.
Yeah.
That is not what he showed us in this last election.
Yeah.
More money than God. Yeah. So it wasn't, it was that he didn't find the voters.
Yeah.
And also, after letting South Carolina choose presidential candidate, I don't want to give any more to red state Democrats. I want a party that's going to support states, but I don't want this impression that we should all operate the way that red state Democrats. They don't operate particularly effective. The reason some Republican states is because of failures in Democratic leadership in those states. It's not just because people are horrible inherently in the South. I realize that there is a culture war element that the Republican Party has been exploiting, but the Democrats have been ineffective at overcoming it. And we thought was so red that we'd never see them again. And it took like Stacey Abrams and a bunch of other advocates to come and be like, hey, actually, this state is flippable if you just invest in it. And we're going to have to do this outside of the party. You guys are such damn fools. What we're basically investing in is like the strategy of hopelessness that we've seen Southern Democratic parties pursuing this whole time. And I don't have any mixed feelings about that just because, and I understand where your mixed feelings are coming from, but I'm just sort of like, I don't want to give any more to this kind of being Democrats.
I get that. And yes, I agree. And I would also prefer it be someone else who would sort of pursue this strategy. I saw an interview with, I think it was Ed Rendell the other day or something, and they asked him about this basically because he used to run the DNC. He's a former governor of, I think, Pennsylvania, right? I think. Maybe. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. But he said something to the effect, because they asked him about Jamie Harrison. He was like, I know that Jamie Harrison can raise a bunch of money, and I know that he has been the state party chair, but I don't know enough to know, has that state party been run well? I mean, we don't actually.
It can't have been run that well because we don't have any.
Right, because they're in the total shitter, right? State. Yeah. So, I know that a lot of those southern states do have trouble because literally the national party has decided not to really pursue. It's been the national party on some level. So, that's where I feel like, I guess I would maybe feel like if someone from one of those states was the leader of the national party, then they would understand that we can't just leave those states completely in the lurch. But I also would prefer that it be someone who has the right ideas about some things.
Winning in these environments. Jamie Harrison doesn't show that he has any new ideas about how you win these states. He wasn't running on interesting ideas.
No,
you know,
he wasn't.
he would, and he wasn't leading some great surge of Democratic voters in South Carolina. Like, I respect that he was a compelling candidate in the sense that he's a monster fundraiser.
Yeah.
But and certainly of the
but that was also
wasted money fundraiser. But that was like
that was anti-Lindsey Graham fundraising that he was doing.
Of the wasted money fundraisers, of the Amy McGraths and the MJ Hagers, you know, the losers, he's the most compelling personality for sure.
For sure.
But that doesn't make him give him any great insight into how to win an election.
It does not
do that.
No.
And I want somebody sees like who is dedicated to a 50-state strategy, who is dedicated to making sure every state has the resources they need. Because another thing that I hate is when we put all of our resources into districts and states that we're not going to win, and we don't look to invest in bench building. We don't invest in the same way in blue states that we do in a lot of these sort of like swingy states. And I think that's where a lot of our bench comes from. It's where a lot of our ideas come from. It's where a lot of our fundraising comes from. Yeah. The idea that we constantly have to go after this strategy that doesn't work for us, where we just keep investing more heavily into states where a new voice and new leadership might find us voters there. I mean, that's what I think we are seeing in Georgia right now. But I mean, why isn't Stacey Abrams then going to be the head of the DNC? Like, she's someone with a track record of, delivering voters. She's a moderate.
Yep.
I don't see it. They always they should pick someone who can get the votes.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The money isn't important. AOC gets outraised by bazillions of dollars in her local races these days. The money doesn't matter if you have the votes.
Yeah.
So the votes are where you want someone who can find the votes. It doesn't matter if they can find the money. And we're just like, I think my major frustration is that like we are invested in the money, the money side of the operation too heavily.
I agree. And before we move on from this conversation, I want to talk a little bit more about Jim Clyburn, because he has also been flexing his muscles about Biden's cabinet picks. And listen, there's reporting that said muscle flexing perhaps rid the world of Heidi Heitkamp. And for that, it's a profound thank you to Jim Clyburn. There's reporting that she was about to be announced for Ag Secretary right at the time that Clyburn was doing an interview last week where he was being like, where is all of this diversity in the cabinet that we were claiming to get from the Biden administration? So like apparently the Biden pulled back from announcing Heitkamp because Marcia Fudge is one of the people who was supposedly like being thought of for that position, who I know Clyburn, I don't know if Clyburn named her specifically, but I saw an interview the other day with the head of the NAACP was pushing for her the other day. So like, I think that they were like, wait, we can't announce Heitkamp right now. So like, hopefully that interview that he did, sends Heitkamp back to South Dakota, like for the rest of eternity.
Right.
But I think, and we talked about this a little bit last week, and we don't really have an update on any specific new cabinet members who have been announced this week. But like, I think it's important to remember that like, look, sure, let's have a cabinet that like looks like America, right? I mean, like, I'm not against that. I don't have an issue with what Clyburn and even Biden have said about their cabinet. But like on some level, we talked specifically about like who the, national security team was. And, a country is not going to feel better about getting bombed by a faux woke administration. You are not going to feel better not having healthcare just because Michelle Lujan Grisham is running HHS. We have to do better than just diversity of what people look like.
Right. There have to. Well. Also, like, first of all, there should be a diversity of ideas that represent wings of the Democratic Party, but also...
And there are people of color who represent those wings.
I was going to say, there are people of color who represent those wings. So if you care about diversity, it can't just be superficial diversity.
Right.
Which is what it is. But also, I get really offended because I think about this a lot because of the number of graphics that we had to see going around after the election being like, thank Black women for everything they do. And it's like, okay, like, sure, definitely do that. But also, can we also legislate in ways that protect and, enhance the lives of Black women? And maybe then we wouldn't have to wander around thanking them all day instead of actually just like feeling good because the party delivers for them. Like a lot of this performative wokeness and performative diversity is it important? It is it is one layer in a cake of importance, if you will, to make a terrible metaphor, sure. In that, seeing yourself represented at a high level is important. And so it helps build the bench in a sort of indirect way.
Yes.
I get that. But I think we are maybe at a point where the bench is big enough that we could also have people with good ideas be part of that diverse cabinet. And that seems to be something that they're not interested in. But also, I get really offended when, they announced they announced it as an all-female communications team because they were so proud that they were the first all-female communications team. Yeah. And it's like, communications is a gendered role that almost always falls to women in the real world. So don't be proud of yourself. It's like announcing an all-female team of teachers or something. That's not that exciting. But also, unless they are also offering a sort of a perspective beyond just being the first all-female communications team that enhances how communications occur, then I am not that interested in celebrating you for it, because that is literally what you should be doing. Yeah. The cabinet should look like America. Yes. It should not be it's like celebrating Sean Patrick Maloney for, getting rid of the DNC blacklist. There are benefits to all of us if the cabinet looks like America, because that means that people of different walks of life and different life experiences have a seat at a table where a lot of important decisions and assumptions about life experiences get made. Yeah. So it's not like they don't get to be celebrated for that. They're doing a service. No. I mean, we're doing a service to them by insisting that they have this. If all of those people, though, are just going to be sort of like random DNC hacks who who are part of the same moderate groupthink nonsense.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If it's groupthink, then it's not diverse.
No, and as Bren and I also have pointed out repeatedly on this podcast, we have to remember there's a difference between experience and good ideas too. And there is a role for people who have good ideas and less experience in some of these positions that I think they go out of their way to find the one woman who's qualified to lead the Fed or, whatever it is. And that isn't the only place that you should look for potential candidates, because the reason you can only find one is because women aren't given the chance to get the experience they need to do that kind of job.
We're going to give...
It's okay to have new ideas.
Right. We're going to give Pete Buttigieg a job, and he's probably going to be the first gay person to have ever done it, but he doesn't have he doesn't have good ideas or any appropriate experience to run a giant government, bureaucracy.
What he has is just being a white man. So he seems like a credible choice for anything. That's literally, but I've been frustrated by the way that Biden has spoken about this in the past. I was frustrated.
Well, he doesn't get it.
Well, it was like when he said, I'm going to have a female. Okay. Great. Someone should have a female running mate, but also you should have the best qualified running mate who brings the most to your ticket. Yeah. And that's what I want to hear. And I want to hear that person happens to be a woman, but I don't want to hear that you lowered your standards. So
because I think on some level,
talk about how great you are for having a woman on the ticket.
Right. Because on some level, Kamala Harris, in many ways, was that person.
Was already that person.
Right. Yeah. She didn't have to be just the woman that he added. She could have been the person who was bringing the very thing that he needed to his ticket, regardless of that.
I think the Democrats get to, especially sort of kind of upper middle class, intellectual class, sort of white, rich people style Democrats get really taken with very obvious, cynical identity politics overtures. And so because of that, the kind of people that exist in the DC circle, really pat themselves on the back for this, for these kinds of new diverse hires. But I don't think as voters we should decide that that's acceptable to us. I find the way the Biden administration talks about diversity incredibly frustrating. I find the way that everyone in their sort of wing of the party speaks about diversity incredibly frustrating for exactly the reason I was saying. They want to walk around all day thanking Black women for, helping get the vote out or whatever, but I don't see them actually advocating for those women. I don't see them advocating for women in general, even though they're hiring them. You don't see them advocating for Latino voters, in when they talk about who is and is not going to be a potential Latino choice for whatever. You don't see them advocate for the kind of people that they're pretending to represent. Yeah. And it's more important I would rather have a cabinet of all school children who does a better job of advocating for all of those communities and everyone, than have just like a cabinet that doesn't do anything but just like looks great in photos.
I know.
And I was even like, Cornel West has been doing the TV circuit basically saying this, where he's sort of like, it's nice to, it is something to consider as you are making these hires, like people's backgrounds are something to consider, but it's more important that you have principled, responsible people in these roles than anything else.
Right.
And that should be how you sell them to us. And it's exactly great that they are also these other things.
Right. It's like they're trying to sell me Neera Tanden right now as the first Indian woman to ever do anything. And like, accepting. She's also right. It's like, okay, but people who don't know are literally like being like, oh, sure, great, an Indian woman to like run this certain thing or whatever. Neera Tanden is like one of the world's most unacceptable human beings to have any sort of job in any administration, or even to just like have a job. Like she shouldn't even, she's unemployable, Neera Tanden.
And this is a very conservative way of approaching diversity as well. This is something that like Republican administrations have historically been very good at, where they are like incredibly good at tokenism, but they just don't legislate in ways that support communities. Like Condoleezza Rice was a historic hire for Secretary of State. That didn't make her an acceptable choice.
Right. She wanted to bomb everyone just as much as everybody else did.
Exactly. And that is still her then advocating for racist policy. So the fact that she herself is a Black woman does not buy us what having a principled person in that role buys us.
Yeah.
And there are principled Black women who are like also good at ideas. Right. There's just like millions out there.
I was going to say they're everywhere.
Available. Like I find everything about the way that they speak about this frustrating, and I hate that I'm also agreeing with Clyburn about anything having to do with anything, and so I'm frustrated about that as much as anything.
I know.
But also, pick Marcia Fudge to be the ag sec. Like, don't be picking Heidi Heitkamp. It's like have two thoughts to put together.
Right. Yeah, seriously. And dignity. Also have some dignity.
Have some dignity. Exactly.
Get her out of there. Nobody wants to see her again. Nobody's looking for Heidi Heitkamp. No. Anyway, we're not going to dive too deeply into this, but there was an interesting article that was like the lead story on Politico for a minute, which was sort of sad, but it sort of felt like it made sense to talk about here as we were talking about what the Democrats are going to do moving forward, and also the Jamie Harrison thing and what state parties look like and what they do or don't do. In this instance, they don't do anything well anyway, because we're talking about Iowa. And so maybe this was more of interest to us because we've been there and I'm from there, but I think
well, and also we went to the caucuses this year.
Right. Well, right. And, I think that like the caucuses were terrible on so many levels, but obviously the caucuses were being run by the state party. And I think there was a lot of discussion at the time about how hapless the state party was. And clearly they were right. And I think the thing that makes me realize this, thinking about Iowa, where they sort of, they got smashed in the presidential election and the state has been moving more right, but like honestly there are equal number, like literally it's like 33.7 and 34.1 like Republicans to Democrats in the state, right? So it's like a third Republicans, a third Democrats, and then like just a little bit under a third of independents for party registration in the state, right? So like the fact that the Democrats are getting their asses handed to them on like by 10, 12 points in the presidential election, a similar number in a Senate race, and then also like losing House seats. They now only have 1 of the 4 House seats after they had 3 of the 4 House seats, is insane. But we should also, so you really do have to look at the state party. And like, I realize everybody sort of like likes to have a good laugh about how terrible the caucuses went, but like the two are tied together. So when you think about like what's going on in states across the country and like what's going on with party leadership at the local level, you really do have to think about like what is going on, you know, also with the national level, like what kind of support do they have? Who is running these parties? Like who are they pushing to be candidates? I mean, they ended up with Teresa Greenfield, who's never run for anything in her entire life, who ended up just basically being the female Bruce Braley. And then like they were all shocked that she got her ass handed to her on election day. And, you know, similar in some of these other House races also, they also lost like a ton of races in the state House. Is looking worse for Democrats than it ever has in Iowa, or at least in a very, very, very long time. You know, and this is, we are not so far away from when Democrats were getting elected there statewide, and they were, I mean, they voted for Obama, for God's sake.
Well, and also,
twice,
we're not so far away when one of the more progressive members of the Senate came from Iowa.
Well, right, you know, so I just, it doesn't.
But these are choices, you know, I mean, like choices, we saw this in New York State, in upstate New York. There was a woman who ran for state Senate and won, you know, 2 years ago, and she was great. Yeah. And she lost by a large margin this time. And part of it was that she just didn't get the support from the local Democratic Party that she deserved. She was, and this is in a time where the Democrats got like, you know, super majorities in like every chamber. So this is in a big Democratic sweep here in New York State. And it was like the party had blinders to what their actual needs were in a lot of, you know, in a sense. A lot of their efforts were going to like Pennsylvania and other states, but they failed to provide this, they failed to sort of correctly identify which races really needed their support and deliver that support locally. And I think you're sort of seeing that in Iowa where, yeah, it's been moving red, but part of the reason it's been moving red is because the Democratic Party has failed to capitalize on what the Democratic culture that did exist there, has failed to run compelling candidates, has because of that failed to sort of expand their electorate. And at a time when the Republican Party is so kind of like wackadoo gung-ho and very public and very, you know, and is sort of is sort of offering something new, even though it's crazy. Right. You know, it's important that, especially in a fairly rural state like Iowa, it's important that the Democratic Party be a presence and not just like bungle through elections by running people who are just like the absence of an idea. And I think you see that slowly over time, you see how that erodes support for the Democrats. So what we're seeing is, you know, what is it, 6 years after Bruce Braley in a seat that was once held by Tom Harkin, you aren't even finding the race to be that close anymore. And it's because over time, like between Bruce Braley and Teresa Greenfield, like what were the Democrats doing to that anyone thought that they were like worthwhile people to begin with? Yeah. You know, I mean, there's been nothing compelling going on with them. Right, exactly. And I think that an important thing, obviously, when I looked at the fact that it was split almost evenly amongst Republicans and Democrats and independents, I'm sure a lot of states are like that. I mean, even good God, California had more no party preference people registered than Republicans for a minute. I think that has actually changed back, that Republicans are just now edging out no party preference. But, you know, I think that this is a thing that, and you and I talk about this all the time, and the left talks about this all the time. I think that there has to, one of the things that we have to learn as a party, and we choose to not learn, or we choose to learn the wrong thing, is like, what is an independent? What are the third of the, and it's hard, I get it. Like, that's probably the hardest part of this equation, is figuring out how to like appeal to the members who are Democrats, and then also like figuring out what independents want. But like, I would contend, and we know this to a certain degree, because like, well, Bernie Sanders won the primary this year, at least in terms of raw early vote numbers. But like, not only that, we know for a fact when Bernie Sanders, what is one thing that Bernie Sanders has to always do whenever he goes to a state? He has to explain to people that they have to change their party registration from independents to Democrats so they're able to vote
in the state, right? So like we know that a good amount of these independents are Sanders voters. Like we can just assume. Like, and I'm not here to contend that some of them aren't also Trump voters.
Right.
But I would almost bet my life that more of them are on the fringes in either direction than there are snowflake people that are so in the middle they just can't figure out which party represents them the best.
I have like, a bold thing to say, which is if you are that person, if you are someone who's like, I'm just right down the middle on everything, you are already a Democrat.
Yes.
If you're at least
a modern Democrat, a Democrat in 2020.
Yes, anyway. A modern. If you are the kind of person who's like, I just want centrist fiscal policy, I want my taxes lowered, and I don't want to hear about any of it, you're already a Democrat.
Yeah.
The independent voters we're talking about are people who don't find a home with the Democrats or the Republicans. Let me tell you where there's a lot of room out there in political land.
Right.
It's on the far left,
right,
and it's on the far right, potentially in a non-authoritarian kind of way. It's on the populist wing of the world.
I agree. And I think from a state that, like you said, just recently voted for Barack Obama and also has not that so long ago had a very progressive member of the Senate, I think that you have to figure out, if you're just looking at those numbers and you're thinking that each party, I mean, or independent, I'm counting them as a party, is a third, then you need to get all of your people to vote for you, right? And then you also have to figure out how to get basically half of the people who are registered as independents. And I would just contend, as a thinking person, the way to not do that is, or the way to do that is to not nominate Theresa Greenfield.
Right. Well, right?
How is she moving the third of the state that is a registered?
But how's she moving anyone?
Well, how's she moving anyone?
How is any one person just like, oh, Theresa Greenfield, I've got to get out there and vote for her?
What is additive to your base about Theresa Greenfield? Literally nothing.
I think that this misunderstanding is related to the fact that a lot of those independent voters, the reason they don't feel like they fit within one party or another is because they have extreme positions on both wings, and not because they are just reasonable.
Right.
Like, I am officially a no party preference voter. Brent is a no party preference voter. Like, we are not, in California, a lot of the no party preference voters are people on the left that got sick of the Democrats' antics. But I would say even in especially in a rural state where populist messaging really resonates on both wings of the party, what you find when you ask people who are independents what they think, they on the one hand want lower taxes or whatever, but they also want single payer healthcare. Or they want to get, they didn't want the TPP back in, 2018, or 2016. They had positions that were only being articulated by the far right and the far left. Yep. They weren't just like, I just don't know who's speaking to me. What they really were, the problem they were having is no one was speaking to them.
Right.
And I think that you can grab those voters based on the one good idea they're supporting and not worry about the rest, because they know they'll never find the perfect match.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what Sanders was really good at doing, was with a lot of those voters, he would be like, oh, you're in rural America, there's no healthcare infrastructure and you can't afford your healthcare because insuring yourself as a farmer could not be more expensive.
Yep.
And so here's a thing that maybe you like. And they would be like, that is a thing that I like. And also I like, Christianity. And he would be like, well, I can't help you there.
Right, but also keep doing that if you want.
Right, but if you want to go into crazy churches and whatever, but like he had to, the olive branch was over something that the Democrats think is extreme. It was never over something that was like, well, this is just, we want to make sure that Wall Street's not too uncomfortable. Like, it was over something that was actually just like a populist talking point. Yeah. And I think the Democrats are constantly searching for this elusive voter who can't make a decision. And the reason that these voters can't make a decision is because they're on two fringes. It's not because they're stuck in the middle.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
And if that's an opportunity for us, if that's what this Trump movement is, if that's where you can find Trump voters, we can have them back. We just need to also be sharing good ideas instead of no ideas. Right. Like, those are voters that were up to all sorts of wackadoo nonsense. They'll vote for our wackadoo nonsense. They don't have any principles.
No.
Like, so we can grab them back. We just have to try.
Yeah.
And I think it wouldn't even take that much effort to try. Especially, I'm thinking specifically about some of these rural states where, I think when you look at how the vote breaks down in primaries in a lot of these rural states, really rural areas tend to go for more progressive primary candidates.
Yeah.
It's the Democrats who are in those regions are really, really Democratic. They are not Republican lights. Right. It's the urban Democrats who think that the other people won't vote for a more progressive Democrat who won't vote for them. And that's almost always how it works out when you look at how rural counties vote in Democratic primaries.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And that's something that no one seems to care about. So I'm glad I shared it with all of you. You guys, Donald Trump is having a really hard time right now because he doesn't like losing and he doesn't like not campaigning. And so he is trying to insert himself as much as possible into this Georgia situation without also declaring that Joe Biden won Georgia. Right. And so he's in the middle of trying to sow doubt into the election results, but also ask people to vote in an election. And it's become very confusing for everyone. There are a bunch of Republicans telling people either not to vote or to write in Trump for the Senate races.
I love that one.
I say do that.
Obsessed with that one.
Obsessed with it.
Yeah.
But also Trump went and did a rally in Georgia where he was shit talking Brian Kemp because he's mad that Kemp won't steal the election for him like he did for himself. And that's the problem with election thieves, you guys, is they don't work for hire. He's not going to steal it for Trump. Like he already knows how to steal an election. They need him more than he needs them. Right. So in any case, he also did this like crazy Facebook Live event.
Steal your own election. Trump.
Steal your own election if you're such a winner. In any case, so we're not going to spend too much time on what he said at these rallies and Facebook Live speeches because it's just been insane. But what we are going to spend a lot of time on is that Michigan hearing that went on for 5 hours where Rudy Giuliani brought up a series of star witnesses to talk about all the voting irregularities in Michigan. And one of them was visibly drunk. Right. Well, first of all, Giuliani farted.
100%. He absolutely farted. Somebody reacted to it. It was loud. It was caught on camera. There's no getting around it. His farting.
Right. Toot-liani was going around the internet. So he already has a name because of it. But then the reason that this hearing went viral, 5-hour hearings don't usually go viral. In fact, all hearings are boring for the most part. And I say that as someone who has testified, so I would know.
That's right. Yeah.
There was one specific witness who really brought the drama. And that person was a blonde lady who was drunk.
I've realized now, because as you started talking, I was like, because I pulled the notes for this one. I was like, I don't think I pulled her name. And you know what? I'm okay with that. We don't need to know. It's completely irrelevant, right? She looked like she'd just gotten out of bed.
Right.
Like
her hair was
like rode hard, put away wet. This lady,
yes,
for sure.
Like her makeup was crazy.
Yeah.
And she gets into this argument with one of the state reps about the voting irregularities.
Yeah, the poll book.
The poll book, wildly off. She'd seen it for some reason.
Off by over 100,000 votes somehow.
She's a mathematician.
Dead people
also.
And illegals, in her
That's
words,
right.
have been were voting.
That's right. And then she promises that it's true because she signed something that's saying she could go to prison if she's lying, and then turned to the state rep and said, "Did you?"
She also accused him at one point of taking it and doing something with it, talking about the poll book.
I know.
Like that he specifically had just like gone and tampered with it, which was why he wasn't seeing
added 100,000 votes.
Right, which was why he wasn't seeing the same thing that she had seen when she looked at it.
But she was doing the most hilarious side eye and raised eyebrow. Like her timing was so impeccable.
Oh yeah, it was great.
Like every moment of it, she does a dramatic pause, and then at the very end, her eyebrows go up.
Right. Well, she's like that type of person who just sort of like will say something like completely ridiculous, but then like she'll say it in a tone where it'll be like, "Gotcha." You know, like, aha. Like she just like did a mic drop moment, but really she had just like
she said nothing.
Drunken rambling, right? Yeah. Like
oh yeah, every sentence was punctuated by an aha, basically.
Yeah.
By a facial aha.
Uh-huh.
In any case, she got spoofed on SNL. That's also gone viral.
Like as of a couple days ago, like almost 18 million people had watched it. So I'm sure many more have.
More now.
It's an old stat.
You might be shocked to hear the hearing didn't show any evidence of voter fraud and was in fact just an entire sham. And also, there's like one part of that hearing also where Giuliani, who we now know has COVID, like tells one of the witnesses to take her mask off because he can't hear her.
Oh yeah. He also tries to get this witness's attention, presumably, probably to tell her to stop fighting with the state representative. Although maybe he's into that, I don't know. But like, he was very clearly like trying to he was tapping on the table like next to her. But, like, I mean, he really was not as much of a star witness as she ended up being, because she is truly a star now. She was maybe a little too star-y for what Giuliani was looking for in the moment.
Right. Even a professional lawyer like Giuliani, who's famous for his successful lawyering, knew.
Right. She was not doing it right.
A bit much.
Yeah.
And before we move fully out of election news media, we just have one completely random off to the side comment, which is that Jon Ossoff released a video on TikTok, but maybe also on Instagram, of him and his wife preparing their Thanksgiving pies.
Uh-huh.
And if you had any doubt that Jon Ossoff was not the most boring, quality-less human being on the planet, even after his hometown newspaper alerted you to that fact, this video perfectly encompasses everything that's wrong with him and everyone, because this is the most boring video that has ever been created or viewed by people. It is also a supercut of all the most interesting moments from the two of them making that pie. And you might wonder what constitutes an interesting moment between Jon Ossoff and his wife, what is her name, like Alicia or something, making a pie. And one of them is what their favorite after work snack is. Mm-hmm. And her answer was muesli, which is not a thing that anyone should say on a video about.
And then they had a long conversation about how to say muesli.
Then he mansplains how to say muesli to her.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, every moment of the video is like a giant no wrapped up into I don't even have the words for it. I recommend that you don't look it up, but I also just want to point out that there are people who know how to star in an internet video of themselves, and those people also could run for Senate.
Right. I had a conversation the other day with a friend of mine who texted me and said, and we've had this conversation before, and I always tell him that he's incorrect about this.
This is a rumor that's out there.
Right. Well, where he confirmed that he was indeed sexually attracted to Jon Ossoff. I
keep hearing this from people.
And I said specifically to him, I was like, well, that's unfortunate for you specifically, because Jon Ossoff doesn't have sex. He gets off on talking about muesli. So like having a sexual attraction to him it's
like having a sexual attraction to a drapes or something. Like it's just sort of like an inanimate object. It's like having a sexual attraction. It's like those ladies that try to marry the Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
Like it's like that.
Except at least the Eiffel Tower has personality.
Qualities. Yeah, no, I know. That's I mean, if you haven't seen this video, then I don't think that you can even imagine the depths of boringness that we're talking about. It's like the kind of experience where every additional minute that you watch it makes you actively more bored. I'm always on the lookout for things that make you more bored the longer you do them. Like, you know, some things are boring sort of collectively, and it's like, okay, this is a boring experience, and it's at the same amount of boredom for the entire, you know, you're at an amount of boredom. I find a lot of board games to be boring all the way through, but they're not like more boring at times. This is like every second that you're watching the video, you become increasingly bored. Until by the end, you have tried to take your own head off.
Right. Well, and I think it's important to mention that it's not that long, because you might think to yourself that maybe like watching a 2-hour conversation with Jon Ossoff and his wife talking about muesli and Thanksgiving pies would be boring. And I would think that would be true. That would probably be boring even if that was like AOC. Like that might get boring at a certain point. This is literally like 90 seconds.
Yeah. I think it's 30 seconds. I don't even think it's 90 seconds. Like it's an amount of seconds that's too short for the amount of boredom I felt while watching it.
That's what I just felt like that was an important distinction to make.
No, that's you make a good point. So in any case, that's just how that campaign is going.
Yeah.
So just keep an eye on Georgia. In any case, moving on. COVID relief. There's been a lot of talk about it, and we're going to have a little talk about it. And that is because of something that Joe Biden said today that he has also said in the past that is a thing that I take issue with.
Yeah.
Which is, today on Twitter, he's going on about how we need COVID relief. And this is something he said before in past tweets. And he said that people don't just want handouts. They want a fair shake. And I want to discuss the use of the word handout to describe either COVID relief proposals or the absence of COVID relief proposals or anything, because I think this is an example of a Republican framing of an issue that I think ends up being disastrous for us in the long run. And it was something that lefty Twitter like took huge issue with, because the implication that we need to dispel the understanding that what people need, that people, want handouts is crazy, because people want fucking handouts right now. People need handouts.
Well, and not just want, like need.
Right. But I mean, like, we should not shy away from the idea that that is exactly what the government has to do, because when you say, oh, people don't want handouts, then suddenly you're suggesting that it's okay to attach criteria to getting the relief. And what we really need is the government to just give everyone money. We don't need complicated proposals that decide who deserves it and who doesn't and who's most in need and what we need. And I said this, back in March or April or whenever it was, where I was like, I don't take issue with the fact that some wealthy people who were still employed got the $1,200 because they were people that were going to spend the $1,200 too. And what we need is people to be spending $1,200 because that's what keeps the economy going.
Right.
And so what we literally need is for us to all just admit to ourselves that people need handouts. And I don't think that framing them as not handouts helps us now, because then that creates a contrast where other kinds of assistance, government assistance, are the handouts, and this was not the handout. And if that's the case, then we're just looking for the line where we find the handouts. And I say this a lot about abortion, which is the reason that the sort of Hillary Clinton version of abortion policy, where she's like, well, it's okay to ban some late-term abortions, but not most abortions, is so dangerous, because it just leaves us arguing about where the line is, where the government's allowed to tell women what to do with their bodies. Whereas you can just say there is no line because there is no place where the government allows women, decides to allow women what to do with their bodies. Using the word handouts gets us into a conversation about who does and does not deserve the government's assistance. And right now and always, everyone deserves the government's assistance.
Well, right now, and that's what I was going to say. Like, this line of thinking is sort of like how you end up sort of like later calling someone who does get a quote unquote handout like a welfare queen, right? Like, and so like the idea that like this isn't the government's job to do, whether in a pandemic or not, like this is why we have a social safety net, and that's why we call it a social safety net, is that so when people are in need of something, whether it be healthcare, that's why we offer, Medicaid and things to people who are in need of it. Like, obviously we could do better with that. But I mean, like, there are reasons that we offer, food assistance and things like that. Like, and those are not, we shouldn't be going around calling those handouts.
No.
Because like, those
and
are
we
things.
Should be going around trying to figure out which of those are handouts and which aren't.
To blame people for taking them. Like, to make it seem like people are bad people because they accepted such a thing.
Exactly. And I think also, we should be really careful to point out that when it's something that we do for corporations, we call it an investment. Totally. And when it's for people, we call it handouts. Yep. And so I think just the idea that he is comfortable using that terminology to describe what we are or are not going to do in terms of COVID relief is a sign that his conception of how the government should take care of people is not really up to this moment. Yep. And that's something we have to stay on him about, because this line about handouts leads directly to austerity conversations.
Totally.
Later. Because, a handout is unearned. A handout is something you just get. And if he's even suggesting
it has to have an offset also, like when we
do it has to have an offset. And if he's, I think what he's trying to do is say, no, people really need this. It's not a handout. But that indicates that he views other kinds of government assistance as handouts, and that those are unearned. And like, that is not a safe place for us to be operating rhetoric wise at this moment, because these are the kind of people that will flip the switch to austerity on a moment's notice.
Totally.
So, I think overall, be careful about allowing these Democrats to get away with conservative framings of economic issues, because they do it all the time. Yeah. Pete Buttigieg did it all the time. Hillary Clinton did it all the time. They often are very comfortable with conservative framings of issues.
Totally.
And I think it is our job to burst that bubble every single time that they do that, because the conversation should not be taking place in their terms.
I agree.
And this should be called at the most, the scariest thing this should be called is assistance. But it should not, the word handout should not be in the conversation that we're having right now about this. We should not even let them suggest that there is some reason to talk about handouts.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the issue is that they're always going on about people needing skin in the game. They're always suggesting that, people need
asking
to deserve
how we're going to pay for something.
These things. They're always asking the people. And I think about this a lot when it comes to healthcare, because the conversation about healthcare is largely held up in this country by our desire to make sure that people only get things they deserve. And so we're always asking, well, what have people done to deserve universal care? What if they don't make any money and they're not contributing? What if they're, what if they have a job and it gives them insurance? And are we really going to pay for their insurance? It's like the question about, are we going to pay for the college educations of billionaires? And we don't focus on the social repercussions of not thinking that everyone deserves these things. Everyone deserves some money right now because that's actually what's best for the economy. It's not really what's best for those individuals.
Well, right. Well, that's what, I've got this, we were, right. I think I had pulled that Andrew Yang quote that we were going to talk about later, but I feel like we're basically talking about it right now. But he tweeted something to the effect yesterday, which I thought was just so well put. He was like, do you know what business is like? Customers with money.
Yeah.
And it sounds so simple and almost silly in its simplicity, but it's also, nothing has been said more accurately than that.
I think, when you think about any assistance program, what grocery stores like is people who can buy food. You know what food stamps let people do? They let them buy food. Like, what doctors like is patients who, can afford to be treated. Do you know what Medicare and Medi-Cal, not Medi-Cal, Medicare and Medicaid, and Medi-Cal, provide is, patients that can afford to be treated. Like the way that the language of handouts is a language of individual responsibility, and we should only be using the language of collective responsibility in a crisis like this. We should not be using the language of individual responsibility. And I think it's going to be really hard to sell people on these measures if we're willing to buy into their language. And that is exactly what has turned out to be the case, because we finally have a proposal for a relief, package, and it's $908 billion, which is 1 zillion less. It's literally $1 trillion less than what the Democrats wanted.
Over $1 trillion.
Over $1 trillion less than what the Democrats wanted.
Because the HEROES Act is 2.2
right. The HEROES Act is
trillion,
2.2 trillion. And there was a time when Mitch McConnell signaled he was interested in settling for like 1.8 or something like that.
Well, McConnell never said that. Trump said that, but Trump also said that he thought that he could squeeze McConnell. I don't know if he actually at that point had any power over McConnell or not, but regardless,
Democrats were like, we would never at that time.
Right.
And then now they're settling for 908. And this proposal, it has liability protections for businesses, which is, if there was ever a non-starter to end a discussion over, that is it. And it doesn't include any direct relief payments.
And
it only, the one smart thing they did at the beginning of this crisis was that they made unemployment pay well. And it cuts that assistance in half.
Yeah.
It pumps in an extra $300 a week. That's not actually enough to keep a roof over people's head and food in their fridge.
It's not. No, the 600 was decided because I believe that was an average, right? Isn't that how we ended up with 600? Yeah. This is like, look, this is another one where I have such sort of mixed feelings about, because it's like, obviously Pelosi, and even members of her own party were pissed that Pelosi didn't take something prior to the election. There are a lot of people who are sort of when they actually really think about what lost Democrats seats here, it was that they didn't take any of this, especially when Trump was offering to do it. Now, like I said, McConnell was supposedly saying that he was never going to take up 1.8 trillion, but Pelosi didn't even talk to Trump and Mnuchin about that bill. She was just sort of no, because it doesn't have X, Y, and Z in it. But it was close to what she had, at least the number that was passed there. So basically, you've got a bipartisan group right now trying to get something done before the end of the year because they feel like they should, which they should. Sure. And so they're basically trying to find some sort of middle ground between this quote unquote skinny bill that McConnell wants, which is only 500 billion, and then the 2.2 trillion that's in the HEROES bill. So they're still much closer to the 500 billion in the bill that they're at right now. So they didn't really find a middle ground. They basically just only put a little bit more money. was in there in the McConnell plan. But yeah, and the other thing that is like crazy to me is that sort of like, first off, I'm not going to go into another like crazy tirade about like how we just can make up money, because it's ultimately not here nor there. But like, we can all agree that like when we passed the $3 trillion bill initially, that was just like handing out money to anyone, like we didn't pass a tax cut to pay for it. So like the idea that like we can't just do this is crazy anyway. But what was surprising to me is that the IRS is saying that the direct payments only have cost so far 270 billion. So like you could add that to the 900 billion right now, and you would still be closer to McConnell's number than you would be to Pelosi's number. So like, why wouldn't you just add it in there? It was McConnell's idea in the first place to send out checks to people. Remember at the beginning of this when Schumer and Pelosi were like, well, I don't know if we should send out checks to people. I mean, like, it's the Republicans who thought of it in the first place. So I don't know why you wouldn't just do it. Everybody knows you need to. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know that people need money in their pockets.
Exactly. And I think that the holdup is still about this conception of people not deserving it getting the money.
I think it is too.
And that is not relevant right now, because people need the money so badly that we shouldn't worry about who doesn't deserve it. Everyone deserves it. We just deserve it inherently because we're living through a crisis, and we deserve a government that is responsive to some needs.
Yeah.
But I think that was the Schumer Pelosi initial reaction to that was about who does and doesn't deserve the assistance.
I think it absolutely was.
And
which is why they means tested it anyway.
Exactly. And like, I don't understand how, first of all, I don't understand how we got to a place where we still have not had any more stimulus.
Well,
that blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I don't know how anyone's eating in this country. But I also, like, I don't understand why there is not some interest among the Republicans to passing at least, like, I would think, and I'm obviously delusional because I don't understand any of this, I would think that the one thing that you could probably get some of the GOP on board for is the direct payments, because that's a thing they can bring back to their district and say,
totally,
I got this for you.
And that's is ultimately in the first place. And that fits it, even though it is a direct check from the government, which I know they like to think is a terrible idea. It does fit in with their whole brand of people having money in their pockets, right? This is why they always want to tax. This is why they always want to pass tax cuts, because they say that they want you to have the money and then you can decide with it. Like, you shouldn't be having to send it to the government. Like, this is just basically it's basically that. I mean, just go back and tell, if you have problems with it, just call it a tax cut. It's not. Exactly. It doesn't make any sense. But like,
call anything
do it anyway. Who cares? Nobody.
It's like how I've been advocating that people should call all sorts of things religious freedom exemptions. Like, if I want to kick you out of my business because you're not wearing a mask, I should say that it's because of religious freedom that I have to do it, because my religion requires you to wear a mask. And that, I feel like, at least is a line of reasoning they have to respect. The law, they don't seem to care. But if it's not me trampling on their freedom, it's them trampling on my freedom of religion, then I don't see how they can argue back.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't understand how the stimulus checks aren't the first thing we were able to get through. And I have a theory about it that no one is going to want to hear, and also may not be true, but I love a conspiracy theory.
So do I.
I think that it is actually Democrats that need all that corporate money that need all those corporate bailouts to go through. I think that we should have had a clean bill for direct payments, because it's an easy thing for anyone to justify on the basis of needing to have their constituents have money. And I know that the Republicans would have been difficult. Like, I know that they're being difficult right now. I know, like, I get that. But I think that part of the issue here is that there are some masters that Democrats also have to serve that are not the ones we want to hear about. And they're trying to fit in how to thread a needle that they have no business even considering in this situation. Listen, like, they should be thinking about is direct payments to people. All they should be thinking about is rent relief. All they should be thinking about is how to make sure that individual people are able to weather this crisis. There should not be from them ever a mention of the business side, and then the compromise should be that they're willing to provide paycheck protection program and things like that.
Listen, I'm going to offer up, I feel like, what is basically proof to remind you that that is not even remotely a conspiracy theory, because we talked extensively about how much we hated that HEROES Act. And the reasons that we hated that HEROES Act, which was basically just a democratic messaging bill, was because there was a massive handout to basically just direct payment to health insurance companies because they were going to offer to hilariously pay people's COBRA, which is like the world's most expensive thing to do. There were corporate tax cuts in there. Right. You remember? There were handouts to corporations. I mean, just the HEROES Act is riddled with them. So you didn't come to that by any way other than just being right. That's not a conspiracy theory. You're just correct.
Perfect. I mean, I think we sort of like, I think in Democratic circles, there's this sense that Mitch McConnell is the only holdup here.
No.
And that's not it. We have been our own holdup. There are plenty of very specific, popular with constituent proposals that could have been pursued independently, considering we're just making up money at this point. So the money is not a real, like, that's not a real, we don't need to pair it with something to, offset it with a tax cut to a corporate, like that's, none of that needs to happen. All that needs to happen is someone needs to write a 3-line bill that's like, let's give lots of money to people. And that is something that is directly beneficial to every constituent in every person's district that none of them have to feel compromised about, except for that they can't waste the opportunity to serve their masters. And I think we need to really reconceive what our priorities are as Democrats if we want any route out of this thing, because the holdup was not just Mitch McConnell, it was everyone. Everyone conspired to do nothing. And so when you talk to your Democratic representatives and they're like, what could we do? The Republicans wouldn't go along with anything. Remind them that they actually are empowered to do a lot of things that they are also choosing not to pursue. You're not calling them right now. It doesn't matter. But I'm just saying, like, I'm sick of the way that the Democrats have messaged the blame game without messaging any ideas. I don't think that we should allow them to get away with also not doing their jobs.
I agree.
And I think also we should it should be our responsibility to push them to be like, you actually shouldn't make considerations beyond what benefits my constituents right now, because your constituents are actually in a huge crisis. Crisis is not the same as an individual in crisis, And so while I understand wanting to protect people's businesses in the sense that we want to make sure that like people with restaurants don't have to close those restaurants. And there is a lot we can pursue to make sure that people don't lose their businesses in a crisis like this, but almost all of those things are direct assistance to the people. They are not support for their business. So that we approached this wrong is what I'm saying. And also we're allowing the Democrats to tell us that they don't have any responsibility for what has been a priority on their part to give bailouts to corporations. Anyway. Here's what's in the bill.
Go for it.
$300 unemployment benefits. Fuck off. Do $600 like an adult. Like I can't with these people. $300 billion for the paycheck protection program. First of all, give more money to the paycheck protection program, but
and also make sure that it's actually, they're saying that it's going to,
it's enough money to get to the businesses that actually need it.
Don't send it to giant corporations and the LA Lakers and whoever else.
It's not just like the Lakers, a proposal that guards against evictions through rental assistance funding, but no one seems to know what that means, and no one can describe it. It's just housing and rental assistance.
There was the senators had a press conference and they got asked about it and they didn't explain it at all. And they just called it housing and rental assistance. And then they moved on with themselves.
Well, they don't know what it is, is the problem. $16 billion for vaccine distribution. Sure. Have that be more money too. I mean, that's important. Liability protection. The bill sets a 6-month moratorium on liability for companies that it's intended so that states will like create their own policies, but obviously every state is going to create the most insane policies because that's what many states do. We should not be having our federal government bailing out corporate liability over our lives.
No.
Liability protection protects a company from being liable if they force you to go to work and then you die. Like that is not how you do it. You do that, you do it in secret later. It's like what the 9/11 VCF is liability protection for airlines. So the 9/11 VCF created this fund so that people wouldn't sue airlines or the federal government or anyone else because there were all these lawsuits going around and nobody wanted to pay them out. And so they were just like, we'll create this big fund and then it will be like no one can sue anyone, but they can get this money. That's how you do liability protection, is you do it later after you've figured out who might be liable for something. And you do it out of a big fund, so it seems like you're being generous. You don't do it preemptively so that people just die and they can't sue anyone for reasons no one can figure out, even though the person is clearly responsible directly for their death. And that's insane. It also has $82 billion for education, $10 billion for childcare. That should also be more money. $160 billion for state and local aid. Republicans don't want to give state and local aid because they hate everyone, but there we are. And then there is a sort of wing of the party on both, or wing of both parties, that is interested in the direct payment thing.
Yeah.
That wing seems to be, well, it's the left wing of the Democratic Party, but also inexplicably Josh Hawley.
Right, who has been the only person of the Republicans who has been having the right ideas on this, because you'll remember back when we were talking about the HEROES Act, actually, that like he was the one who was specifically working with Pramila Jayapal when they were trying to get past, at the beginning of this, like their plan for this was literally similar to what so many of the European countries had done, which was to just keep people attached to their job so they can stay home, and then pay them something at like, 80% of whatever it was that they had been making. And then like also when businesses open back up, everybody still has their same job or whatever. That plan, which never went anywhere, which is a tragedy because we'd be in a much better place right now. And actually probably, when you think about it, perhaps would have spent less money on all of this. And also, I think just in terms of the actual coronavirus numbers, we would probably be in a better place because people would have been able to actually stay home and not have to worry about like going out, going to work, and doing so many of the things that have caused them to like actually get COVID. But anyway, it was Josh Hawley, Republican, who was thinking of that idea. So like he has been doing great on all of this, which is odd, but here we are. I mean, we should give him credit because he's actually the one who's, been having the good ideas, at least for the Republicans on this. But like, yeah, he, Sanders, AOC, there's like this weird, well, it's not that weird because you and I have been talking about it for literally the better part of a decade, about the coalition that the far left and the far right could probably find themselves together on so many issues. And this is certainly one of them.
This is something where you hear from a lot of moderates that like Bernie Sanders never gets anything done and isn't effective. But oftentimes what he does get done is he finds one issue that an insane person can work on with him, like the Yemen thing with Mike Lee. And he finds a way to have a good idea with a bad person. And this is an approach I think we could all stand for. Because currently the Senate deal is a Manchin-Romney bill, which is
neither of them have ever had a good idea collectively.
Least good idea having
individually, collectively,
on the planet. I mean, that couldn't be a worse sounding bill. So the idea that the bill is not sufficient doesn't shock you when you hear that it's a Manchin-Romney bill. That's like hearing it's like a, Ossoff McGrath bill. I mean, that's not
nobody wants
the
that
idea, people. But I feel like in a situation like this, the left and the right actually can find common cause, and that part of the issue is that there's this sense that no one should even try because they're all in these, and it's, it's not just the left, that's, the right is also a problem. Like I'm not suggesting that responsibility belongs to either party, but it feels like we are sort of not in a position to talk to the right. They're not in a position to talk to us. And there are a few things in a crisis that you can usually find common cause with on the far right. And we're not being given the opportunity to do that. And it's largely because the government is in chaos. The government is not functional right now. And so the few things that we could do in a crisis like this are not open to us at the moment. And instead we have a bunch of 80-year-old technocrats who are insisting on doing nothing.
Yep. That's it.
That's
what we've got.
Not the right answer.
It isn't. No.
In any case, Hawley said on Twitter on Friday, "I will gladly work with AOC and anyone else who wants to help working families. Families and working people in need should be the first consideration in COVID relief, not last." And while I disagree with almost everything that man thinks, he couldn't be righter.
Yeah.
Broken clock. It's right twice a day or whatever the saying is.
That's it.
They're talking about attaching this to an omnibus. I've actually been watching Democrats go and do the cable news rounds over this bill, and it is so confounding. because what they keep saying is we just need to get through to January and then we'll have Joe Biden, so we'll be able to do stuff. Forgetting that they will not be any more or less able to do anything in January than they have been all of this time, because Joe Biden is not going to make the Senate Democratic.
Yeah. Well, and that is one thing that I have found hilarious about this, because and look, the Democrats are right. They should, I think they at least understand on some sort of level, and they have been bad at actually producing on this, but they at least understand better than the Republicans that this is going to be a thing that they are going to have to continue to come back to
deal with.
And that's one thing. I mean, my recent obsession with Stephanie Kelton, but she used to be there. She ran the Senate budget, or I mean, she was an advisor to the Senate Budget Committee, and she, has said, she was the one thing that I always tell these senators, if they will listen to me, is that they should know that they are going to have to come back to this. Right. And so I think that they at least understand that they know that first bill is not enough, which is why they passed the HEROES Act, regardless of whether we think it was good or not. Right. They understood that, that's now been 6 months ago, because it was in the summer when they did that. It's hard to believe that that's how long ago that was. But they at least knew that there was more to do. But this idea that you can't take this opportunity now, when it seems like maybe there is some appetite to get something done before the end of the year, just because in a world where the most moderate person ever to exist is the president, and also you still probably are not in control of the Senate, and you have less votes in the House, you are going to magically be able to just send everyone $1,200 and a pony, is
right. They seem
irrational.
They're dying. They keep their excuse for making a bad deal this time is that later things will be great.
Magical thinking about the future.
Right. Yeah. And I just I don't know what magic they're waiting for. Maybe they're waiting for the national legalization of marijuana, because that's another thing they passed this week.
It is.
That is a big deal, except for it's not going to pass the Senate, so it's not that big a deal. But the one thing that is interesting about it is that it was a truly bipartisan bill, in the sense that Republicans and Democrats voted for it and also against it.
Yes, it was a smattering of, I think there were 5 or 6 Republican defectors and a similar number of Democratic defectors.
I'm so curious about these defectors on this. I mean, I get why you would be in favor of legalizing it. Who are these Democrats that are it's probably the Dianne Feinsteins of the world. I mean, she's not in the House, but it's that genre.
No, it is. Yeah. But it's interesting because it's so funny. There's now the support for legalization has increased 20 points since 2012, when Colorado first passed it. It's at 68% right now. 1 in 3 Americans lives in a state that has legal marijuana. Red states recently passed it. Arizona passed it, which did go for Biden, so I don't know if we're calling that a red state, but Mississippi and South Dakota voted to allow either medical or recreational marijuana. The United Nations has now sort of said that that we should loosen marijuana restrictions. And it's funny, I was the one that was pulling the notes for this, and I was just sort of why did they so I was this is an article from Politico. Right. It's an article from Politico, and I was why did they wait to the lame duck for this? And then I was oh, I bet it's probably because all of the moderates in the House were probably thinking that it was just going to be too scary to vote on. And then as I continued reading the article, I was oh no, that's exactly what happened, because that's literally exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. They were supposed to vote on it in September, but then moderates worried that voting on weed without passing another coronavirus aid package would hurt them on election day. So instead, they just did neither of those things.
Right. It's okay, well then vote on both.
I mean, that is so hilarious. We can't give.
We should do nothing because we can't do anything.
We can't vote on marijuana legalization because we haven't passed an AIDS package. So yeah, so let's not pass either of them. What is going on over there, you guys?
You can't know.
I know.
I think everyone's lost any sense of their concept.
Yeah,
no one has any sense right now in the House, because everything that's been happening in government has been so confounding for the last few years, and also so ineffective, that I feel there's just no sort of appetite for action anymore.
Yeah.
Because it's when you try to take an action, it fails. So it's we have to build up their self-esteem again. remind them that they are actually able to pass policy, because that's literally their job, instead of letting them feel like they're just not like it's like a too disappointing to try kind of situation. Because that's almost what we have here. It's like they're too afraid to have positions on anything. It would be nice if someone could tell them that it's actually helpful to have positions on things. They are too afraid to advocate for positions they do currently have, because then they're afraid someone might notice that they had the positions that they already had. They're too afraid to have any decent work, policy for working people, because then they're afraid that the donor class will be mad at them. And then on top of that, they're too afraid to take votes on the record on anything, because then they're afraid someone will tell them that they voted on the record and they'll have to answer for it. But it's like pretty easy to answer for why you would vote in favor of legalizing marijuana if someone asks. And if an attack ad tells people that you voted in favor of legalizing marijuana, that's great news, because people want that to be legalized. So like, there's no way to attack you on it with anyone who could be a deciding vote for you, because it's not enough people. Like, I don't understand why you would get into politics if you didn't want to have positions on anything.
I know. Power.
Like, what is fun? Power. But like, what power? They don't have any power because they can't pass anything. The power comes from passing things. The whole fun of being in government is passing stuff.
No, it's getting to be on TV.
It's like your other part of the job is just constituents calling and yelling at you. And then there's the part where you get to have power. I guess that's true. You get to be on TV, and they do love being on TV. But you know what? There's a whole industry for people who love being on TV and don't want to have any authority to do anything.
Yeah, so true. Interestingly, Kamala Harris is the co-sponsor of the same bill in the Senate, and Joe Biden still himself is not on board with marijuana. So that's
a mess.
Hilarious.
Who can know what's going on though with those two?
Also, speaking of, Gavin Newsom has to pick a senator very soon.
I know, and he's going
to do it wrong.
He's going to do it wrong, and I almost don't want him to ever do it, so I never have to know who he picked.
Yeah, well, I still contend, and I actually sort of convinced some moderate people of this, actually, just because it's a good idea. Because somebody asked me, they're like, oh, is it going to be Becerra, or is it going to be who? There's all these people like being thrown out there. And I was like, what he needs to do, and you and I talked about this, we talked about it on the podcast, he needs to put someone in there who claims that all they are going to do is just finish out her term.
But he won't do it because he wants to be a kingmaker.
He wants to be a kingmaker. Yeah. And he wants somebody that he's cozy with. 100%. But like, somebody who's older, somebody who has done it maybe already or something, like, good God, even just sort of like send Jerry Brown to Washington for 2 years. Barbara Lee is getting up there in age. Like, maybe she wants to be the senator for a couple of years.
Karen Bass seems like she's interested in doing stuff. Send her over there. Also, my idea remains the best idea, and no one will convince me otherwise. Just put Barbara Boxer back in there for a while.
Oh, for a couple years. Yeah, that's great.
Just a couple years. Let some new people emerge in that time. We know Barbara Boxer can do the job. She served us way better than Dianne Feinstein ever has. She knows how to work with Feinstein because she had to deal with that idiot for years. And everyone kind of liked her. Yeah. And she's the kind of responsible person who's already retired once, so we don't have to worry that she's going to stay in there forever.
Maybe because she retired once, if she was in the Senate delegation with Dianne Feinstein, we could convince Boxer to tell Feinstein how great and wonderful retirement is. Yes. So she actually leaves before her term is over.
Yes. There are so many upsides. And also, you will never convince me that hiring a New Yorker to do the job isn't the right thing to do. It's always, if you are looking for someone to fill out a Senate term, get an elderly New Yorker in there. And that is always the right choice. Sure. You can't go wrong, So just something to think about.
Yeah.
In any case, that's the news this week, aside from how we all learned that we're never going to get the vaccine. Brent and I are at the bottom of the list, so we'll see you guys literally never, because we'll never be allowed out of our homes again. And with that, we bid you adieu. That's the news.
Bye.
Bye. We'll talk to you next week.